Well, gents, thanks for joining me here on the floor of AdvaMed 2024. And is anybody else finding a cold in Toronto?
It's chilly, isn't it?
I checked before I came in. I'm like, all right, what's the weather this week? No, I don't need a jacket.
We did not plan well.
I called that one.
That's
wrong.
I had the same problem. I brought a light jacket for running. I'm not running in 39 degrees with 12 mile an hour wind.
We all forgot what this felt like. Yes.
Yeah, and Canada cold's different than US cold.
It's different.
Right? It's totally
yes.
cold. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm excited because this is one of those leading edge, I'd say, activities that Caresyntax and CQI are doing in medtech that is starting to get the attention of a lot of stakeholders that over time have been talking about data. Finally, somebody has put a noose on it and said, okay, here's how we can stranglehold data and put it to work right away. So the value prop, the mission forward, Caresyntax at large, the acquisition of Bruce's baby, share that with the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And essentially we look at the problem of how do you get data out of the OR environment? How do you learn about what's happening in surgery? You know, we went through it as our medtech partners go through it. You can one of two ways. You get it from your reps, or you get it from large scale data sets that you acquire and you buy, and you make a lot of decisions based on those two things. But that doesn't really give you real insight into how your product's being used in the OR space every day. And what we've done to Caresyntax through the acquisition of Bruce and his company is to integrate an entire platform to get that data out of the OR with both pre and post information around that surgical procedure, and package it for our medtech partners to use in ways that they need to use it for. Commercially, regulatory, there's a lot of different packages we can do, but essentially it is a platform to extract real world data out of the operating environment.
And Bruce, give the audience, for those that don't know, you and I got to know each other a couple years ago, I think out of Eric Wilson's SDTS show, right? You're a surgeon, right?
Yes.
You're a data geek, and I say that with all of the world respect. But the genesis of your organization and then where it sits right now in the Caresyntax portfolio.
Yeah, I didn't start out wanting to be a data nerd and thinking that data science was the future of healthcare. I really started as the first leadership position I had was Chief of General Surgery at University of Missouri in 2004, so 20 years ago. And I started studying healthcare and business and leadership just to try to be a good division chief. But pretty quickly what I learned is that the entire paradigm of science that healthcare is founded on is not valid. And it's not sustainable. And what we have to do is learn systems and data science principles. And that put me on a whole new path for my career, kind of eventually giving up surgery and really committing full time to applying data and system science principles to real world patient care. And I became CEO of our first data science driven company, CQ Insights. Got to meet Caresyntax along the way, and they had one of the leading OR platforms for OR integration, data acquisition, and I saw a perfect match because the mission and vision was aligned. We really want to impact patient outcomes, ultimately.
And when we talk about an OR, we're talking about any side of care. So I want to make sure, because I want to pull us down a pathway here of when I think about Caresyntax and some of the others that are doing surveillance in the OR or the cath lab, right? Or the ASC maybe, eventually. The surveillance of what's going on in the OR, but with CQI, what you've done, you've actually drilled down on a very specific device, because when I think about an OR, I'm not thinking about a bioabsorbable stent that goes into the peripheral vascular region. How does CQI impact that kind of product where historically we've thinking about these OR surveillance companies as a telehealth play?
Yeah, what we learned, if we're going to have impact on outcomes, we need to understand the context of the whole patient cycle of care. There are patient factors that the patient brings into the process that can impact the surgery and the outcomes. And if you don't understand that, you're not using what matters in the whole patient process, you can't really predictably impact patient outcomes. So it was really understanding the context matters and the whole cycle of care matters in terms of measuring and improving patient outcomes.
Is the current healthcare system by the providers properly set up for that today?
Yeah, no. No.
Short answer is no, yeah.
The problem is because of the scientific foundation that healthcare is based on, which is called reductionism, what happens is you get fragmentation. And so we're doing care in fragments of care rather than understanding the whole process. When you look at electronic medical records, the current way that we do data, they're all built into the fragments of care. So instead of having data with the patient across their cycle of care, they're in these fragments, and I call it like data jail. And you introduced me to the term, we need data streams. We need data that's fluid with the patient care, and we don't have that today, but we're gonna have to do that.
So Taiki, take me through, if I'm developing a device. I'm developing, let's just say something in the neuro market, stroke in particular, or maybe carotid, right? Let's take a company, I'll throw some love at Inspire MD. They've got a carotid stent, right? And they're going to IDE, and we all know there's multiple indications for that, but they're going for one indication in particular. Where does CQ Insights, Caresyntax step into that equation? I'm the CEO sitting there going, okay, why should I enlist you? How does it make me money? How does it accelerate? How do my shareholders care? I picked Inspire MD because they're publicly traded. How do we get through that?
Yeah, first and foremost, as a startup, your biggest concern is getting to market through your normal pivotal pre-market approval process, whether that's a full trial, whether that is a double-blinded control trial, or whether it's a 510K. And we know that gives you the permission to play in the game if you're lucky and you're able to get approved. But once you get to market, then you spend the next several years collecting data about clinical outcomes, financial outcomes, the actual efficacy of your product in the real world. And we believe that you should be starting that process before you even come to market. So imagine if you were able to go through your normal IDE process, but alongside with that, we have what we call an IDE wrapper that we would be able to collect the outcomes of those cases, collect other factors that went into that procedure to understand really what's happening with those patients. Then once you hit the market and you get approval, you now have a robust data set that you can start using for claims, for understanding what best way to use your product, and setting up centers of excellence, setting up best practices. That to me is really accelerating the entire product lifecycle for you, so that you don't come to market and then start the battle to try to start gaining share. You come to market with that data already. And in our world, we believe in a future where you don't wait 5-6 years to get that data. You do it from day one of approval.
And with that, tell me how that differentiates between when we see somebody go through a trial right now, they'll be collecting data, and some of it will be for clearance or approval, but the other will be, while we're running the trial, we also want to go after that post-market data, because we want to be able to make some marketing claims, not regulatory claims, post-clearance, post-approval. So how does that differ between the IDE wrapper we're talking about?
Yeah, so we're used to setting up prospective trials, based on very rigid rules and protocols. What we do with data is much more data science driven, continuous quality improvement, so that we can learn really quickly. It's almost like agile management or lean startup kind of principles. Go out there, learn, get feedback, analyze, get insights, apply those insights, and do it again. And after a few feedback loops, you start getting really significant impact on what you're measuring, which ideally will be value of care, financial data with outcomes data. And you also can learn for all the different stakeholders. The client, who's the med tech company, they can learn about their value proposition, where the product has good value, where it doesn't, and that's good market segmentation. At the same time, the clinician can help improve value for their patients.
Do you see because when we think about clinicals and we talk about use cases, we're also starting to see a sort of burgeoning of sites of care, ambulatory surgical centers, outpatient surgeries. So procedures are moving outside of the hospital OR, outside of the hospital cath lab. Now that site of care change also changes care teams.
100%.
Changes the way patients are managed inside 24 hours. So does the CQI platform allow you to dial that in?
I think what Bruce really did well, and what we are now just picking up on as an industry, is you need to listen a lot more to what's happening in the real world, and then understand what to measure by listening. And we never really thought about this way. When you go to a clinical trial, you're not allowed to listen that much because you need to go certain exclusion criteria, certain protocol, you must follow a protocol, and it's very rigid for good reason. But most of real world setting or real world practice is not done in a protocol setting, right? As you said, you move it out to the ASC, you move it to a point of care that makes more sense for the patient and for the clinicians, and that's never measured and never really optimized. What we are trying to do with CQI and with the clinical data as a service is start collecting that through listening, through interacting with our care teams, and identifying this is actually the best way to use this product in this environment, in this tool set, in this approach. And every product has a place, every product has an optimal and a less than optimal use case, and we're trying to really drill into that with our care teams.
And that should matter too, because reimbursement changes in each of those settings of care as well, and you need to be informed in that as well for your sales team, the care team, the provider. So that also becomes a powerful tool.
Yeah, there's a lot of perverse incentives with reimbursement today.
Misalignment for sure.
And I think when we have good, transparent data and we can show the value of care, we can help realign incentives around value rather than just volume and pushing patients into more expensive care settings because you get reimbursed more. We have to flip that script. We have to demonstrate how do we measure value and how can we improve it, and then align all the stakeholders, including the government and payers, so that we can have the right incentives for improving value rather than the perverse incentives we have today.
So you just beat me to the punch. Why would the payers not be, and the government, not be behind this initiative?
I think they are conceptually. I don't think they understand the science. For years, decades, the government's tried to push value-based purchasing as a one-size-fits-all algorithm, essentially. And it doesn't work one-size-fits-all. Data requires context. Each local environment's different. You have to understand the science to understand how to measure and improve value. And I think we're going to have to demonstrate that, and then the payers and the government will follow once we can show them how that works.
SpaceX for medtech,
Yep.
right? Elon's building missiles now and landing them and capturing 40-story buildings with chopsticks. And then, so you're implying, or I'm interpreting, CQI is going to teach the government how to look at data right now, which listen, it always comes from the fringe.
Yep, that's disruptive innovation 101, right?
Right, always comes from the fringe. All right, help me, help our audience, being the data nerd that you are. When we use the term, and I see it thrown around a lot, real world data versus what?
Yeah, so when we talk about real world data versus like a clinical trial or a registry, some people consider a registry real world data, but it's not. It's a defined data set that everybody has to follow. Real world data is doing whatever the patient and the clinician do, thinking this is the best care for that patient, and just collecting that data. It's not telling them you got to collect this data point or that data point. And it's really ideally a small, diverse team around that patient care that figures out what's the most important data to collect, how do we best measure value of care in that context for that patient group. That's the real world data we're talking about with CQI.
Because right now, trials are run for safety and efficacy, not for economics.
Right.
I think what Bruce is talking about, the best way that you can make this really concrete, pediatrics is a common use case in the real world today. Most registries will never catch that because it's technically not indicated for that, or it's not the initial indication. 510K did not approve it for that. But plenty of pediatrics surgeons today will use products that they know are better for their patients because of various degrees. And only by understanding and listening with your care teams and saying, how are you using this product today? What part does it play in the care continuum? And then taking the right data points out of that continuum and measuring them, can you really start to say, oh, there is a huge value here. Nobody ever thought about it because we never went to trial with this, but this is a data set that we can help you as a company go to the FDA and get an indication expansion, remove a contraindication. Plenty of use cases here that people are sitting on because we don't have a pathway to really extract real power out of our data today.
It's interesting because if there's one activity in the United States that's going to bankrupt us, it's healthcare.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
Oh,
I mean,
unfortunately, yeah.
It's almost a national security subject if you really want to extrapolate out not too far down range. We're already at over 19% of our GDP. It's becoming more inefficient.
Yep.
You guys probably know this stat. administrative, since 1975, 3,500% administrative add load to number of headcount in healthcare, 150% increase in surgeons, right? So right there. So you've got that. Yeah, and the pay scheme does not pick up data off of clinical trials.
Yep.
Reimbursement does not get determined by clinical trials.
Right.
That seems perverse to me, as you said.
Yeah, it's completely based on how we have structured healthcare in a reductionist science model. And the problem is, with increasing pace of change, you get more and more fragmentation. And that's what you're saying about the increase in administrators. Well, you know, you didn't have an administrator over infectious disease, you didn't have an administrator over IT, now you do, because it's this fragmentation. We have to change to the patient cycle of care and measuring value. The science, as I learned it, and we worked with a team of data scientists for over a decade to learn this. It wasn't, I'm not a quick learner, I guess. It took me like a decade, but the science is all about measurement and improvement. If you can measure something and use data tools appropriately, you can improve what you measure. And we realized if we're going to have a sustainable healthcare system, we need to learn how to measure the value of care in the context of every definable whole patient process and in each local environment. And when we do that, we'll be able to reverse what you just described, an unsustainable financial system.
Well, gentlemen, I mean, fascinating conversation. I love to see this come into medtech, health tech. I think it's much needed. If we were going to be looking at this, who's a classic profile before I close out? Who's a classic profile of a customer, or the 2 or 3 classic profiles of a customer?
Yeah, I'm sure Bruce can elaborate on these. I think number one, new products coming to market that are trying to replace or displace a standard of care in a different way. I think there's a lot of, let's shorten that timeline of 5-6 years of post-market data collection, start collecting that data now in 3-month iterative cycles of quality improvement, and you can get a lot of meaningful signal out of that data within a year. Number 2 would be large strategics who are trying to find the right subset populations that would be served by their products, and Bruce has talked about this a lot and worked with companies a lot on this. There are subsets of populations that are being underserved today because they're not getting the right products at the right time. And we envision a world where precision medicine has not gone into surgery yet. We've not gone to precision surgery for what reason? Why? IDEs are based on generalized populations. We envision a world where there is a certain body habitus, certain demographic that is best served by a certain tool set, and we would love to help the healthcare system in general understand that. So number 2 is large strategics. And then number 3, as you said, the payers, the insurers, and the overall healthcare ecosystem. We are trying to usher in a world thinking about outcomes more than cost. We are so focused on cost. We have squeezed that turnip as much as we can. It's time to start looking at the optimal outcomes. It might increase your cost in the first 30 days, but if it saves cost for you and your patients in the next year, that's a good system that we believe in.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate it. I mean, a much needed, much discussed subject. They might be coming at us with torches and pitchforks in some areas, but hey, those are the people who make the change usually.
That's right.
We appreciate the time,
Thank you for your
Joe.
time.
Always, appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm Joe Mullings from the floor of the MedTech Conference. Be well.